if you want to become a better podcast host, it's important to focus on the conversation itself. And a big part of the conversation, in my opinion, is crafting better questions. In this episode, I'm going to outline 3 tips that'll help you develop better, more interesting podcast interview questions.
Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hi, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. This show is brought to you by my company, Motion. We are a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. A lot of marketers are starting podcasts, whether it's for their own personal growth or for the company they work for. And this is great because it creates a content marketing flywheel for your company's brand. And you get to make deeper personal connections along the way. But I still see marketers treating podcast interviews as a transaction. And it's just another checkbox on a long list of to-do items. And when this is your approach, your interviews really start to feel calculated.
We edit out so many ums and so many things that we think are flaws in the conversation that what we've converted regular conversation into is almost like Siri reading to you a Google Doc. It just has no heart, no emotion. Pauses, thought is really important.
Like Andrew mentioned, if you treat a podcast interview like any other task, it really loses its soul. There's no emotion or true exchange of ideas. And so you end up taking away the true power of a podcast, which is the ability to tell and share stories. So if you want to become a better podcast host, it's important to focus on the conversation itself. And a big part of the conversation, in my opinion, is crafting better questions. In this episode, I'm going to outline 3 tips that'll help you develop better, more interesting podcast interview questions. The first tip is conducting research. The second tip is identifying a goal and embracing your own curiosity. And the third tip is creating an outline for your podcast episode. Let's go into more detail about conducting research. Research is key to crafting better questions, in my opinion. So often when I see or hear a stale interview, I can tell it's a result of little to no research. In some cases, it seems like the podcast host barely viewed the guest's LinkedIn profile. And what happens in these situations is that you end up going through everything podcast audiences have heard before. And your interview guests tell the same stories, the exact same way they've done countless times before. You're not able to really surface anything new. But if you're looking for added value, unique stories, and engaging episodes, then you have to do the work. It's as simple as that. By learning above and beyond the basics about your guests, you can create podcast interview questions that get deeper into their own journey. You can avoid generic questions and capture something unique for your listeners. When it comes to research, I personally use a lot of different tools. At a minimum, when I have each guest join me on Recorded Content, I check out their LinkedIn profile. And I go beyond the profile and into their actual activity. I make sure to check out what posts they've released in the last few months. And I also look at their comments. This helps to uncover what might be really top of mind for them right now. And it also might lead to a new perspective not shared on a podcast before. I also search for podcast appearances on Listen Notes. A lot of guests have previous podcast appearances, and you can use these episodes as really a way to get an introduction to some of their perspectives and their thoughts. And I typically listen to these interviews to get a sense of what other hosts have already explored. And then I also use this to inspire some of my own questions that might present a new take. I also Google them. Yes, this still works well. I check out the search results and see what jumps out at me. Sometimes it's a blog post, sometimes it's another social media account like Twitter or a YouTube channel. And I just don't look at the top results either. I go through 50 to 100 results to see what might surface. I also filter results to just the last 6 to 12 months to see if anything else pops up that might otherwise be buried. Sometimes you'll quickly see a headline that'll jump out at you, and this can help lead you to an interesting angle for their particular episode. I also go through their company's website. Even though I might not be interviewing someone about their company specifically, I still like to get some context about the company and what types of products or solutions it provides. After you conduct research, it's important to identify a goal for the interview itself and lean into your own curiosity. Rather than going really broad with a podcast interview, I like to identify a core problem or conflict to explore. When I do research, I try to align the experience of the guest with problems my audience may face. I then develop questions to help connect the guest's experiences to the audience. And the research you do helps pique your interest in a guest. A lot of times I use research to build rapport in the earlier stages of an interview, to set the stage. When I interviewed Brett McGrath, who heads up marketing at The Juice, quite a few months ago, I wanted to draw a connection between different interests he had, which had little to do with the main topic. It was just to satisfy my own curiosity. I have a very serious question for you. Would you consider yourself more of a wrestling nerd or a B2B marketing nerd, and why?
Wrestling nerd, 100%. I've been mesmerized by the stories, the bright lights, and the characters since I was 3 years old. I remember being at Toys R Us with my mom and looking over and seeing a guy with face paint on, and it just stood out to me. And it was for any wrestling nerds out there listening, it was Demolition Smash, and I had to have the action figure. And then that led to me watching wrestling, WWF at the time, on TV, and I've just been hooked ever since. So it's kind of my escape away from B2B marketing. I love B2B marketing, but I love wrestling a lot more.
That particular question helped me uncover something different about Brett, and it gave the audience a glimpse of something more personal than just his traditional background. So after you've identified an overarching goal for the interview, the third tip is drafting an outline for your episode. Before I do any interview, I write it out. The framework I typically use is called the ABT framework. Park Howell, the host of the podcast The Business of Story, designed the ABT narrative framework. He took the elements of great long-form stories and boiled them down to a 3-part framework, which is and, but, therefore.
Those 3 major components are setup, problem, resolution, the basic 3-act structure of every great story. The beautiful thing about the ABT is you can use that story dynamic in under 15 to 20 seconds when you are trying to hook your audience in, because it sets up an aspirational statement of agreement with the and, but here's the problem that we're going to be solving for. Therefore, here's the rest of the story.
By using Park's methodology with a podcast, you can view the and as the setup or context for your episode. That's really the background information the listener needs to understand the rest of the episode. And it's best if the and relates directly to the needs of the customer. Now, the but portion is the problem. You don't have a compelling story or any tension unless you're able to solve a problem. The therefore part is the resolution of your episode, which involves solving the main conflict in your episodes and really demonstrating how to do it. Once you have your outline in place, it's all about filling in the gaps with your own questions. Now, if you want to become a better podcast host, I really believe it's important to focus on the conversation. To create better questions, maybe go ahead and try the 3 things I just went through. Conduct research, identify a goal for your conversation, and create an outline. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Recorded Content.
Thanks for listening to Recorded Content, a show brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcasting agency for B2B tech marketers. We do the podcast stuff so you can focus on strategy, building brand awareness, and developing new relationships. To learn more about how you can launch and grow a podcast for your company, check out motionagency.io. Thanks for listening to Recorded Content.